This is Carmine Isacco, and you're listening to Vibe 105.
This is Vibe Talks, exclusively on Vibe 105.
Hey everybody, this is Giancarlo Aulino reporting for Vibe 105 with a Vibe Talks segment, and I'm happy to be joined by my guest. He is the master coach of the York Lions soccer program. He's Carmine Isacco. How you doing, Carmine?
I'm absolutely average, Giancarlo. How are you?
Doing great. And Carmine, this is it's been 5 years since you've been on the Vibe 105 airwaves here. The first time I interviewed you, just talking about the York program at the time and some of the players there. Marc-Anthony Kaye, you were telling me he was playing at Louisville at the time. So 5 years later, we fast forward and he's coming off a World Cup, like a lot of other former players of yours. Just take us back to some of these players that you've been around with and interacted with over the years, and to see them at the World Cup in Qatar, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was proud moments for sure. Especially for Mark, how we grew really close. Not a little bit before York and during his York time at York, and just proud of what he's becoming, and just he has to maintain that resilience and maintain that motivation to keep getting better. And I hope he does that. I hope he's learned lessons. So, I mean, as far as our group's concerned, we kind of keep them on their toes. And there's a lot of other players just proud to watch. I mean, and proud to have a little part of their careers as well. Kamal Miller is one story for sure that, his character just resounded in so many ways. He was part of Vaughan since he was probably 13, about there. He went through, our development program, even through the hiccups, which, included kind of a miscue in registration policy. And the team ended up getting relegated to what was then the CSL and out of the OYSL after they won an Ontario championship. And he stayed with the group, and he was that kind of glue that held everything together. And that was a growing thing for him for sure. And every day, whether we needed a goal or we needed a better training session, he just grew up as a leader every single day. And then when we brought him into the League One fold, he was just, he made a lot of mistakes. He took a lot of beatings. I remember once. We're playing against Sigma with Kyle Lairn and Becker and Laria and Kwame, and it was the group on that field at that time was probably better than any CPL group right now. A lot of players playing in the MLS. Alistair Johnston was part of that group. Probably Ryan Raposo had a little bit of a say in that group. So. And he made a lot of mistakes. I remember Laria, I put him on the left side of kind of a three-back system, and he just got eaten alive a little bit. But he grew up quick, came back at it, and players like him and Dayne St. Clair and Alistair Johnston is just a mother's dream. He speaks well, he's intelligent. All his values and his whole upbringing is amazing, and he's just someone you want as a captain every time. Whether he is captain or not, he's always a captain. So I mean, these are great stories that we have about Kamal Miller and then players like Alistair Johnston for sure, and Marc-Anthony and Dayne St. Clair he's just cool and level-headed all the time. And that's important for a goalkeeper. He can't be too high, can't be too low. And Dayne was that type of player that, we always relied on him. So there was times he was with the U-20s and he would be back and forth, or he was going back to Maryland and coming into the fold again. And all these situations. But when an important game came on, we were like, okay, this is Dayne's time. This is Kamal's time. And then there was other players that I used to run a club called CS Azuri back in the early 2000s, which, included some familiar names as well. Some players that played in the World Cup as well. It started with Junior Hoylett. Junior Hoylett, when we were playing him 2-3 years up, probably to this day, one of the only players that made, the goosebumps come out every time. He was just a wee thing playing 2 years up back then in the OYSL. doing things that were out of this world. Like I just go back and I still have those goosebumps watching him play now and see how he's developed and how he's honed his good habits, the good stuff he did, and becoming a proper pro. And he's still doing it at a very good level in England. And then there was another boy named Steve Vittoria, Steve Vittoria was, and again, so proud of what he's become, because Steve Vittoria was kind of the golden child of everybody. Him and Andrea Lombardo and Jamie Peters back in the day of our group. He was always the golden child. So, I would get influences, and you have to play him number 10, and like from family, you have to play him number 10, you have to play him number 10. So I said, you know what, for his development, I'll play him number 10. But I tell you what, when he gets to that next level, they're probably going to put him at center back. At the national program, they told him this. And then it's like, okay, he had his time here. He had his influence, and then he went to Portugal, all ready to play, be that number 10 in the midfield, that Luis Figo and all that stuff, and they put him center back. And he played in the U-20 national in 2007 U-20 World Cup. He played center back for Portugal here, ironically enough. And then when I saw him and his family again, and he was starting center back for the Portuguese under-20 national team, he kind of looked at me, and that was the time where I saw the growth of him. He's been through a lot. And he's such a positive person now, and he's grown so much. Obviously, Lucas Cavallini used to play for that old CS Azzurri group as well, and his story is fantastic. There was a man named George Armua, and he was with Clarkson, and he took Cavallini, Osorio, Tristan Grant to Uruguay. And he would tell me, these kids need to grow up. And Cavallini was always a bull, and always was always the first one there. But when they came back from Uruguay, I remember I was with the U-20s, and we brought all three players into the U-20 fold. They would go back and forth. At that time, they were playing with Clarkson, and Armua was there in the OYSL. And Osorio and Cavallini, they kind of go back and forth, but mostly in Uruguay. It was just a growth period. And I'll never forget, the exit interview we had with Jonathan Osorio. It was the head coach, Valerio Gazzola, myself, Mike Finley, and Rafael Carbajal. So it was all four of us in that exit meeting. And Osorio, who was probably, for me, one of our best players already, came into the meeting and just dominated it emotionally. By 5 minutes into the meeting, the kid was in tears. The kid wanted to play for his national team so bad that he was in tears. And I remember when he left, they're talking about this and his ability to do this. And I said, listen, if I'm picking my team for the national program, the first kid I'm picking is Jonathan Osorio. Regardless of all that stuff, he wants to be here. And he's shown it on the field, but he was just crying. Like, it was amazing. And it obviously transcended. It obviously kept consistent with who he is and how he became a pro. And what he's doing right now is loyalty to Toronto FC. He could have probably gone to Europe. He could have probably done a bunch of other things at the peak. But he's always been loyal to his home, his Toronto FC, and he's the face of Toronto FC. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're building a statue, of Jonathan Osorio when he does decide to retire. But stories like that, and they all have their stories of resilience. I know that there's books written about grit, and there's books written about resilience, and there's movies made, and all that stuff. But these guys aren't movies. These guys aren't books. This is the real life. This is what they've had to come through, and they had to fight through to make it. And every one of their stories is real. It's these are the guys people should be making videos of. So, and I hope they always have that inner fight in them, even though they're getting a little bit of stardom and they're getting a little bit of money and they're getting a little, but I hope that they always have that passion and that hunger and that little chip on their shoulder that Cavallini always plays with as well. But these are great stories. So I know I went long on this. I'm sorry, Giancarlo, but this national team and what they've been through as individuals and as players, from Kamal to Ali to Bojan, to Milan Bojan, who's it's just a story in itself. The prototype of a goalkeeper, and then you have the Maxime Crepeau, who broke his leg to win an MLS championship. This is the epitome and the what is what this team was all about. So it's so many great stories, so many great people. Let's hope that your social media. Let's hope you do a good job making this not go away, because a lot of kids should be inspired by this group.
Yeah, I agree. And just even mentioning that Jonathan Osorio story, that shows the commitment to the national program. We hear so many times in other sports that maybe they're going to weigh their offers, see what other countries are going to offer them. They might want to take another team and commit to that. But Osorio, from a young age, right away, Canada. And it just shows the character he has with Toronto FC as well. And we're even seeing a lot of players on this team get contract offers from Europe. Kone was one of them. Alistair Johnston already playing at Celtic. What does this mean for the national program that you have players now that Europe's an option now, and it's not just, okay, hopefully you can get into the MLS?
Yeah, I mean, it's not what's happening now that's important. It's what the momentum's going to come from what happened, right? I mean, you all know, Julian de Guzman was one of the first to represent, one of the first in the modern era to represent Canada in the European stage and just be incredible at it. Dwayne De Rosario in MLS MVP, scoring goals after goal. These are examples that kind of influence the Mark Anthonys of the world and the Jonathan Davids of the world and the Alphonso Davies of the world. But it's not where we are right now. It's where we're going with it. How are we going to use this to build our better infrastructure, to understand what it's going to take to make sure that our players are at that level to compete on the world stage? So how is our infrastructure, whether it's in the grassroots system, whether it's in the amateur adult system or the high performance system, how are we going to adapt to make soccer relevant? How is that? It's relevant. How is it going to stay relevant and get better? That's the question marks that we're having right now, as far as I'm concerned. It's great. Alistair, we all know Alistair is going to be a great example of what Canadians are and what Canadians can do. We all know Atiba has been an incredible example of what Canadians are and what Canadians can do, and he's still an example at his almost 40 years old. So this is what is, but how are we going to use what is to grow what can be? And that's where I'm a little bit afraid of. So that's where we need to be a little bit more, a little bit more assertive in defining CPL, in defining high performance, in defining what soccer is in our community. That's important. That's important. And by defining things, we can transcend, all the negativity. We can make sure that players are given the proper pathway to get to those next levels.
Yeah. And also just a pathway, because I remember a time you were talking about there with Dwayne De Rosario, those players, Jimmy Brennan was another one. You're going to have a handful of players that take that next step, but it also comes down to what the pathway looks like at the grassroots level. And when you were playing, how was that different to what it is now? Just to give our listeners a better idea.
When I was playing, I remember Jimmy Brennan coming in as a young 17-year-old, cocky 17-year-old, and he probably learned a ton with his little time at Toronto Italia, because we had an incredible foreign base. It wasn't big, but it was a small, incredible foreign place that understood what it was to be a professional. They understood that their next meal was coming on how they played. And we had also this one kid, a Chilean kid, Michel Rojas, he's older than me. And the passion and the fights, and he would, absolutely destroy his opponent just to make sure that he wins, not the game, that battle. And these are influences that they had. And when we were growing up, we also had players like Paul Pescisolido. And we had, back in the day, some of us went to school in the States, not many, and then a lot of them stayed in the CSL, the Canadian Soccer League, back in the day, with the Blizzard, with the Rockets, with the Whitecaps, who became the 86ers, with Halifax. They had London Lasers, and all kinds of Hamilton. It was a great league. That's the thing. But it was based in Canadian players with a handful of foreigners, one or two handful of foreigners that made a difference, right? And we also had the National Soccer League, which to Croatia, with the Serbs, with Panhellenic, with Toronto Italia, and you had, and it was 4,000 people in the stands every game, right? And even in the CSL, there was good following in the game, and you just had a fantastic Canadian product sprinkled with some foreigners that made things better. And that for me was the upbringing of Thomas Brzezinski. If you remember, Thomas Brzezinski played in Everton, played in the Prem. Paul Pescisolido didn't ever get to the Prem, but played at championship level. Paul Fennick, players that played in the Prem in Scotland. Jimmy Brennan, but before that, Craig Forrest. Players. This CSL was an incredible pathway, professional pathway for Canadian players. Sprinkled by positive players that made it to the foreigners that made the Canadian players better. That was the infrastructure back then, and it was going away from the culturally based, except the National Soccer League. But the CSL was going away from the culturally based, and they were the Canadian Soccer League, and it was a fantastic league. And when that league was on, we were a game, a minute away from getting to World Cups, and we got to the World Cup in '86 with the CSL. Now, after Canada's the CSL didn't get the support from Canada Soccer, to be honest, or by. A lot of things went under, and then we had to join different leagues, and different things happened at different times. That was kind of the falling point of Canadian soccer, when that CSL didn't exist. And I hope to God that CPL can get to that level again, give those Canadians that carrot again. Because like I said it to you many times, there's a lot of Joe Watermans out there. There's a lot of Ryan Telfers and Jonathan Osorios out there. They just need to be uncovered. But we need to play them. We need to give them opportunities to fail. So we will. That's important to me. So without the CSL, there would have been no Paul Pescisolido. There would have been no Nicky Dasovic, who had a good career in Scotland. There would have been no Thomas Brzezinski, who played up team. So there's, and I'm missing many examples. And there were so many. Alex Bunbury, who had a great career in Portugal, started with the Hamilton. So many players that were incredibly influenced by the Canadian soccer and made a difference.
And even just the program itself, like you were a part of it, that early stage, and you went to indoor soccer later on. Where did the whole fascination come with being a coach and transitioning into that?
You know what? I had the luxury working with someone that was, for me, everyone has their mentors in there, but for me, I don't know, he was, I don't use this term loosely, but a god. So he, in Bob Gansler, when I went to Milwaukee, I had some very good coaches, some very good influence, some really good people who taught me the value of hard work. Emilio Hernandez, George Armua, coaches of that ilk, a gentleman called Egidio Papayas, Robert Yarushi and Carmen Marcantonio brought me into the professional fold back when I was 16. And they were definitely characters, but I still, you just learn a different value system. right? And but the one person that was incredibly prepared, incredibly intelligent, just a way about him was actually an American, Bob Gansler, and I played with him in Milwaukee for 4 or 5 seasons before he went on to MLS, KC. He was pretty much. He brought the U.S. back to the World Cup in 1990. He was the head coach. He brought a U-20 team, which was unheard of, to the semifinals of the World Cup. And we won a championship in the A-League back then with the Milwaukee Rampage before he went to MLS. But just the way he went about things was eye-opening for me. And you know what? And I just did a lot of regurgitation of his values. And a lot of, and then I took things and learned things from different people, from courses, from having an open mind and taking, the values of the Emilio Hernandez and the Jorge Amuras of the world and just grew. And then I loved it. I honestly loved it. I didn't think I was ready to stop. And my first group that I had were about 14, 15 when I took over at CS Missouri. I had some incredible characters and players, and my assistant coach right now, Luca Forno, is one of those that if you don't like coaching for people like Luca Forno, and I had another kid, Frankie Bruno and Franco Rushada and Jamal Smith, and these, if you don't like coaching with people like this, then my first experience could have been a terrible one, but these guys made it so much easier. And I tell people this from the beginning, all my success was based on their idea of their culture building. Whether they knew it or not, they were holding the next group accountable to be what they were. And we had a lot of success there, and we had a lot of success with incredible people. And ironically enough, there's 7 or 8 of them that are coming for a post-holiday kind of card game that we hold, and there's going to be 8 to 10 of them come over, and we'll share a story, show me pictures of their kids now, and so that was what kept me in coaching, the love of that, and just the growth, and I had a lot of at Central School. I had a lot of freedom to do a lot of things as far as education-wise. Whether it's spending 3 weeks in Lazio with the first team and the reserve team and the grassroots, whether it's spending, there's a place, Acqua Citosa in Rome, where they build the grassroots curriculums. All that stuff was really important for me in my growth, and the passion kind of came out of me, and I love doing what I love doing, and I'm proud to say that coach building and coach mentoring, and one of the coaches I mentored right now is now the head coach of Halifax. So I'm so proud of these guys as well, and what our whole program has kind of led to, and there's a lot of Ilya Orlov at U of T and Serge DeLuca, the technical director at Vaughan, and there's going to be a longer list growing and growing, and that started for me by what I gained by all these good people, and especially Bob Gansler.
And now you're also using that at York University, men and women's soccer, and just over a decade now of being a reputable program that a lot of people, when they hear York U, soccer is the first thing that comes to mind, just all the success you've had. And now, like, when you're bringing in players, is it that allure that brings them in? Like, they hear York U soccer and that might be kind of helping you in recruiting a player, or is it still you're looking at a player and there's like a certain quality that you want to bring in?
So, I mean, times change, right? It's programs have developed, and I think, and I will say this, whether people think I'm being, presumptuous or not. I think that York and what Paul James even did before that, and what we did at U of T before that, I think raised the bar of what soccer was in the OUA, raised the bar of what soccer was in U Sport. And I think that by doing that, we've created full-time positions. Toronto Metropolitan University has full-time position. McMaster is posting for a full-time position. Guelph, it's endless now what full-time positions are and what they're doing right now. So what I'm saying is we set a standard, and people have to catch up. People had to catch up. And, Paul James was one of those. And I think our program, when I started at U of T and what we took to York as well, I think that we raised the standard. And I think that that's continuing. And you know what? In doing so, it's hard to recruit now. It's hard, right? It's hard. And it's because everyone else is that much better. Everyone else is that good too, so they can compete. And that's the reality of the situation. And if I should expect less, then I would kind of be not true to my word, because we wanted to grow the game, especially in the university sector. And now it is. And now people are competing. I mean, look back in the day when I was playing at University of Maryland, UBC won, I don't know how many titles in a row. Now, it's tough. It's tough to win. It's tough to win one. And in the kind of modern era, there's a whole last team to win a back-to-back was probably us in 2015, 16 or 14, 15. So the game is changing, it's evolving, and we're developing pros, and we're developing, it's fantastic. And we raised the bar, and people like Pat Raimondo at University of Montreal are raising the bar there. Mike Mosher, his father before that, are still holding massive standards, and we have to keep up, and we have to be better. But it's not easy, because you at University of Toronto Metropolitan University, Carleton, Guelph, these are very, very good programs. And there's other ones that I just, all those programs are getting better. So yeah, it's a standard that we fought hard to make, but now, you know what? You fought hard to get university soccer at a certain level at the university. Now you've got to live with it. So recruiting and all that stuff isn't so easy.
And also, this is a question I'm sure a lot of coaches have to deal with, but I've never asked you this. As a coach of both programs, men and women, how do you, best navigate the situation and make sure that politicking isn't a thing? I'm not talking about Democratic, Republican, player, I play 90 minutes and let's say in Markham, and why am I not playing 20 minutes here at York? So how do you control that situation as a coach of a program at a university?
Well, I mean, the work you do before is important as well. Obviously, it's exposing these players to what university soccer is, but not only the players, it's the technical directors and the coaches that you need to say, hey, this is our standard, right? This is our standard. These are the U Sport players or OUA players playing in League One, playing in that amateur adult, and this is what these kids need to meet. If they're not at that level, then they need to understand that there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be a process. It's about a 5-year investment or a 4-year investment. It's not about that 1 year or that half a year. So these are things that are important that they need to understand. And there's always a little bit of a disconnect because of, a little bit of entitlement, a little bit of what's going on, and a little bit of ignorance that they just don't know what the youth sports system is. And we, especially OUA fans, we got some fantastic teams in the OUA, whether, and I think, on the women's side, we went to nationals this year. We had a decent year. We ended up losing to Ottawa in the OUA final, which is, nothing to scoff at because they have a great program. But you beat up Queens, who's for me, a fantastic program, and fantastic players. So, I mean, that's the reality that, that they don't have the perspective of things. And not only the players, but the coaches and the TDs, they need to understand what the OUA level is and what the U Sport level is. But again, I've come to the conclusion right now, on the women's side, we've been lucky by projects. We've had projects like a Jotum Chuhan, who, probably was just went to D1, came back because she wasn't good at that time. She couldn't play. We made her a project, and she became OUA MVP. There's other California Mitchell's another example, who just is recovering from ACL and didn't play in our playoffs for us. But like there's so many good examples. Nora Gonheim and Sarah Wong from the past, players that are, if there was a professional league back then, they would be knocking on the door and probably part of it. So that's our goal, is to take those projects, take those players that are supposed to be mediocre and make them good, make them great.
And even like after they become players in the professional level, once you're transitioning, they're going to get some offers, and I'm sure they're going to ask you for advice. Like I'm sure you didn't like how Marc-Anthony Kaye was out of position at first with TFC, and then he ends up getting a better opportunity later on. So when you hear some of the opportunities, you try to steer them into a different direction. Like, okay, this coach likes to play a certain way. You might not be a fit there, but in that same level, you'll be a better fit on this team. Like, does it come down to that a lot in terms of players that you're a part of, or like you're part of their development?
Yeah. I mean, Alistair Johnston was our defensive midfielder, right? And the thing is I had the luxury to play I played Mark Anthony kind of on a right side, coming in with his left-footed actions and basically as a number 10. But yeah, you just, at our level, at times, there's a kid called Joe Mack on our team right now who's getting some looks in the CPL, maybe MLS next, and they're looking at as a right back. But my job for me is not only to make sure that I'm getting the most for the group, but I'm also giving him situations that are going to be best and make him flexible. So playing him in an 8, playing him in a 10, playing him in a free-ish role on the left side or the right side gives him flexibility, and people could see the perspective that he had. We did that with Soji Alatoya a lot, and he did get picked up in the CPL draft. But that's the flexibility that we have, is giving these players enough exposure, and not in different positions, but in positions where they could see his or her adaptability.
That's great. And now also like the adaptability that you see in these players, like some of them, maybe they go in the draft and don't get selected, or they get selected, go back to university, and during the off season, they're playing in League One. So how important has League One been now to being like some sort of an extension of a feeder system towards a CPL?
No, incredible, like incredibly important. I think we started in 2015, and a lot of what we did was based on developing those pros. At that time, we were using 2015. We're probably using a lot of Kamal, a lot of Dayne, a lot of Joe DiChiara, who was probably involved. Chris Manella was involved in and out. We had Mathieu Laurent, who ended up playing and having a good career. Manuel Zambas. Like the list goes on and on. It's incredible how many players that had pro opportunities. There's pro exposure in that group. And the league. And again, it was standard set. From the beginning, we had an idea of what we wanted it to be. And to be honest, without Vaughn, who knows if Woodbridge and Sigma and so come into the league as well. So we consider ourselves, standard setters as well. And then the quality of play we brought into the league kind of started to surpass that old CPSL. So there was kind of a transitioning thing that was going on, and I guess it's the CSL now, or it was the CSL. So it was kind of a transition, and we felt like we did things right. And we had a whole system. We had our U21s, we had U17, 18, U21s. We had OSL. Back in the day, the OSL was a very good league. When GS, there's still some good programs in there, but Caledon and GS were teams that would have 100% did very well in League One. But I digress. But we had the system. Now, that was important. Having the system, having that kind of elevated responsibility for some of these players, and that the ability to grow was important, was incredibly important. And then it came to a fruition, whether in the end, whether they went off to NCAA, U Sport, or they stayed with our group, right? I mean, if you look at our last group that won before before CPL actually started, a whole bunch went to CPL. Justin Springer, Daniel Gogarty, Colin Vance, Austin Ricci, Dylan Sacramento, Carrero, who else was there? Matthew Arnone. All these players, Jared Phillips went on to play CPL. So I'm listing 8, 9 players right there that, like, from that year went right into CPL or that year or a year and a half later. So I mean, yeah, that's kind of how we evolved things. And now from this year, already 3 players have been picked up for CPL. Patrice took with him Kosi, took with him Massimo Ferrin, he was gonna be a great player in this league, and we're hoping Riley Ferrazzo gets done soon, which is another great story. So at least those 3, and there's a lot of potential for others to go. And we're hoping that they just might. So that's the whole point of what we do. That's the whole point of what Sigma did, to get those players graduated and moved on. But again, we set the standard, us and Sigma and Woodbridge and Oakville and player teams like that set the standard for what it was to be to have a professional mentality and a professional setup, right? And some rules, which, I have a bone to pick with Dino Rossi and those people that kind of limited us on what we can do and what we can't do with players now. And whether it's administration is right or wrong for the growth of the game, I can accept the fact that it's necessary. But what we had will never be duplicated. What we had at Missouri with Jamie Peters and Victoria and Hoylett and Derek Rios and names that did Lombardo and Frankie Bruno, like so many players, Richard Asante, who was with TFC, so many players that came through that system that will never be duplicated, but we had the freedom to do it. Now, a lot of people are handcuffed, whether it's a few bad apples that caused this, or whether it's lack of foresight. I think that a lot of administration is getting away in what potential League One can have.
Yeah, I agree there. And like even now, just how fans get involved in the game, even players, they're also inspired by what's in the local market. And York United is slowly trying to build that York region, but Toronto FC was for a long time what inspired a lot of these players to want to become pros. And you were there on the sidelines that first inaugural season, and you saw what it was at the start. And now all of a sudden it's grown to where Jovinko comes over, Bernadeschi and Signé. What was it about that first season that made MLS say, okay, you know what, this Canadian market, it's going to work here. This could be a soccer city, and growth from more than that as the years came by?
You know what? I don't want to contribute it to MLSE, because back then, I'll put myself into it. We made a lot of mistakes. And MLSE made a lot of mistakes with the people involved, with the way they went about things. They did a lot of amazing things, like Paul Byrne and that marketing company, and the way they promoted the game, they promoted what TFC was beyond the field was incredible. And the game day experience there, I credit Paul Byrne, I credit the MLSE there, which had an incredible staff back then as well. I credit them for the product, the game day product, which is fantastic. The other thing I credit is the hunger for football in Toronto. When you would go to a game, and you probably still not, there was the supporters, Red Patch Boys, all these groups that were and they, again, we talk about standards. I mean, they set the standard of what MLS is right now as far as fans are concerned. We had 22,000, I'll call them not yahoos, but passionate, incredible people that just exemplified what football could be. And I credit Paul Byrne and that group that did this, put this together. And on the field and in the administration, we made a lot of mistakes. Like it was a bit of a debacle on how some people went about it. But then patience, 30,000 people, 22,000 people every game when we were terrible. And just chanting, and then patience, and then starting to evolve. And I think I credit the massive evolution to people again, to people like Bazbachenko, people like, who came in and kind of changed the system, kind of put in a blueprint of what should be, what ought to be. And then, Greg Vanney comes in. A man with tons of integrity, tons of ability, in a tough market, did what he did, and people kind of pointing the finger at him, people saying, "Oh, this is a hoax." Bazbachenko brings in his boy, blah 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 blah. He had to go through a lot of adversity, and he did amazing things. And Bazbachenko and him did a lot of great things to make this to make Toronto what it is. And now we're hungry for success. Now Bill Manning, who's an incredible professional, who's done amazing things in this game for a long time. I mean, when I was playing for Milwaukee, he was the GM from Minnesota, which was a great program. Is kind of trying to fix with what was left behind from all that success, which is not easy. It's not an easy task. And he has his plans and he has his way about him. And he brought in incredible people like Bob Bradley. Bob Bradley is an icon in North American soccer, and and then people like that. This place is going to be successful, for sure. But it's number one. It started from me, the front office, the office that put the marketing plan together. Paul Burney and company that did that and brought those 30,000 people, crazy people. It was like, even in year 1 and 2, the atmosphere was incredible. And we saw it again when Insigne and Bernadeschi played their first game. Like, I tell you what, I know they've played in some of the biggest stadiums in Europe. That was emotional for them. That was something that was new to them. And that was beautiful. Like, it was the picture of beauty for me. But that, and then we fixed everything that went on. We bought people like Greg and Bazbachenko, who brought credibility and integrity and ability to the whole situation. Now we know what it takes, and now we have that taste of success. And I'll never forget 2000, when we lost in the final to Seattle in PKs.
Oh yeah.
This is how passionate these fans are. I was with my buddy from the States who came to recruit in Keyside. I was like, let's go to the game, the final. And -10, obviously the -10 degrees. It was nuts out there. You remember the save by Stefan Fry? Yeah. And then it's crazy. So I was like, game over. We went to a Shoeless Joe's by King Street there. We go in there and packed. So we go to the back, we find a place to sit, whatever. And lo and behold, it was the headquarters for I believe it was the Red Patch Boys. And this is years. I hadn't been there for years and years and years. And I look to the back, and they're coming out of this room, and they're in tears. They're crying because what TFC was. I'm like, they could have been crying because they were hammered out of their minds, but they were crying boss, right? And I will never forget 2-3 people come up, and they look up, and they're like, "Oh, Carmine, where you must be really upset. You started this whole thing." I was like, "How the hell do you know who I am?" They're like, "We never forget a face. Are you kidding me? We know what you're doing. We know what's happening, blah, 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 blah." And then they went back to their tears. But it's amazing how they attracted this group of passionate people. The fans of Toronto FC are incredible. I love the fans of the Leafs. All right, no, I don't. I love the Raptors fans, but Toronto FC fans are absolutely amazing. Amazing because of their something that's inside them. Football fans all over the world. Toronto Maple Leaf fans, yes, they have history, they have passion, they have connection, but you're not going to see the Southsiders or the Red Patch Boys go to the game in a suit. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree there. And just some closing questions here. A lot of people look at the game right now. You see players longevity wise, once they hit a certain age, some of them slow down, not what they once were, like Cristiano Ronaldo. What do you make of that whole transfer. He's going now to Al Nassr. Like, is that going to hurt his legacy, or do you think it's just he's making the money? It's a big move for him at this stage of his career.
I mean, again, for me, it's an opinion. I think he's going to hurt his legacy for me. I mean, he's done so much for the game. Lionel Messi would have stayed at Barcelona for his whole career. No questions asked. But, when he makes his next move, it's either going to be back to Barcelona or what's next in his life type move. You can argue that for Cristiano Ronaldo, he's preparing for what's next in his life. But I'm not sure if the financial windfall was necessary for him. I mean, I envisioned Ronaldo going back to Sporting and reinvigorating that whole Portuguese league to make them a top 5 league. All that was. I think that for me is like the pureness of the sport, and what Ronaldo did for me wasn't pure. But again, as far as the game and the evolution of the game, I don't know if we'll ever see another Messi. I don't know if you're ever going to find a player with that awareness, with that incredible vision, that incredible dribbling ability, passing ability, all combined in one. I mean, Mbappe's got definitely some of world-class strengths, but he'll never be a Messi. I'm not sure we'll see too many of those players anymore. And the game's evolving, right? The game's evolving and changing, and the French and their physical domination and their commitment to defending all that are still the team that's going to win more than any other team. Obviously, there's one-offs where they can lose games and penalties and all that stuff. But right now, they're best set up to be that transition of the game. So if we look at transitions of the game, you can talk about the Brazilians, then you go to the Italian catenaccio, then you go to the Dutch game, and then you go to the Spanish who were dominant, and the game was tiki-taki, and it was incredible to watch. Now, then you go to the French, who are physically dominating, who could put those incredible moments together, who defend well. Now, what's the next transition? Because Messi and people like Messi, I'm not sure we're going to see again for a long time, because the athleticism is that much higher. But Messi, Mbappe dominates athletically and technically. He's incredible as well. Don't get me wrong, but Messi dominated as a footballer, as a general, as a tempo setter, as an attacker, as a pure player. I mean, you could say the same for Pelé, but Messi and Maradona, that ilk, it's going to be tough to ever see someone dominate the flow and the rhythm and the tempo and just that game. It's going to be hard to see, hard to find ever again.
And just speaking of these players, like you just talked about, maybe Ronaldo should have went back to Portugal. You envisioned that, reinvigorated it. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up this player, Gianluigi Buffon. Went back to Parma, and now at the young age of almost 45, what he did against Inter. I know you're an Inter fan, but what can you say about that performance? He's able to still make those high-quality saves late in the game, and at his age, looks like he still hasn't lost it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me, and I remember talking to Pat Onstad about this as well, because Pat Onstad had a long career, and then when he went into the front office for DC United, he ended up playing some games for them as well. It's the stopping part. As soon as you stop, it's going to be tough to get back into that. But Buffon's never stopped. He's never stopped training. He's never been stopped being a professional. He's never stopped, and he was the best in the world. He, for me, technically always the best in the world, and he showed it again. But that part of it, that's for me, he's one of the top 10 athletes of the world. Michael Jordan's of the world, Gretzky's of the world, Messi and Maradona and Pelé. But he, for me, is one of the top 10 athletes of the world, because of it's so hard to maintain the physical traits to be a goalkeeper, to have that type of longevity. But again, his key is that he kept going, never stopped. And his training is probably as hard as it was when he was training at Nottavasaga when he was 17 with Parma.
Just hopefully never retires, Carmen. Well, it still goes.
What was the Japanese player who just retired at 53?
Yeah.
Maybe.
He's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
Well, Carmen, before we wrap up here and let you go, how can our listeners and viewers here get up to date with everything York Lions soccer? And I guess, how can they support the soccer teams at York?
I mean, we aim to entertain, so make sure you go YorkUlions.ca. And not just soccer sports, everything. I mean, I was just at a volleyball game the other day, and the level of athleticism, the level of commitment to play is fantastic. So support new sports. Hockey, men and women, is fantastic. Basketball all over the place is fantastic. So get out and support new sports, because it's important. It's an important part of our student athletes development system into our pro transition. So get out so we can support it, and get out not just to make university athletics more important and more relevant, but universities in general more important and more relevant, because we need that connection back to the community, and the community needs to connect with us.
Highly recommend that. Well, Carmen, I appreciate you sharing your time here and coming on Vibe 105. Talk all things soccer and your career, some of your players' career, and I wish you all the best.
Happy New Year, Giancarlo, and thanks for having me.
Vibe Talks, exclusively on Vibe 105.